Shirley for the Sewing Connection, Series 14, Program 4. Throughout the series, I find myself using a lot of fabric tubes. They may be decorative accents winding here and there on the garment surface, or they might be utilitarian fasteners. Or on this program, those tubes will join together to actually become a garment. I'm going to first make some tubes. Now remember last week we were cutting them out, and I used a lot of difficult fabrics here, and so there are times when I might want to make bias tape instead. But with these difficult fabrics, I'm going to make tubes because you can't go wrong that way. So also bias was a key word because here's just a straight piece of fabric left over from the slacks I'm wearing, and it doesn't really make nice tubes. It has little dents in it, little wrinkles. So I don't like to use fabric on the straight when I'm going to make tubes. I like to use it on the bias. It's really a lot nicer. Well, here was a fabric I had last week that was being cut into bias strips, and it's really a difficult fabric. Here's what a strip looks like when it's cut out. And it, for one thing, doesn't press, so that immediately eliminates bias tape out of it. You can't press it, so tubes have to be the answer. Here's another one, and look what this one does. It's going to be used in some of these things I'll be making, and see how it gets wide and narrow. Again, tubes are the answer because you're not going to be able to press it in a standard width. Sometimes I'm going to use some really thin chiffon in the next show I am, and this also, it really does well in tubes. Now if you use anything this lightweight, this sheer, think about how you're going to put it together. Of course, you're going to have to fold it in half to make that tube, but don't hold it in your hand because see how you can get really off kilter if you do that. You will get little bias wrinkles if you get out of torque. So you don't want to do that. What I like to do with all these thin fabrics is, and here's another one, and see how, again, wide and narrow. But what I like to do with these thin fabrics is just put them down on a flat surface, fold them over the way they want to go, and put a pin there at the start of it so that everything is really in line and you can't go wrong then thereafter. Something else I like to do with these, because if you just put them in your machine and try to stitch a straight line, more than likely as it stretches out or whatever it does as you're trying to sew it, you're going to get thick and thin places. So I like to use this fast tube, and it's a little extra foot that you can get. And if, by the way, you have a long shank machine, there's an extra little piece of plastic there that extends that shank. So be sure you get that if you have a long shank machine, as I do. Otherwise, with a short shank machine, you don't need it. But you always, or usually with bias, have a point there. I've just tucked it in so that it goes over this finger that was around there. It goes over that. And by the time it's over that, that finger is going to hold it all nicely in place so that we can then just put this down and stitch it. A nice little feature of this fast tube is the fact that there's a release back here, and you can release it and move this tube to the right or to the left until it's right where you want it to be to stitch the seam, and then you clamp it closed and it won't move thereafter, so it'll keep this very standard. So all you need to do once you have it all in place here is go ahead and stitch, and as soon as I start stitching, I will take the pin out because of course I don't want it to be involved. And since I just started this, I'll tell you what, I'm going to move that over a little bit beyond. Of course, I better raise this, and I'm going to make that tube a little bit narrower because this is such narrow fabric. It'll just do better this way. So put it down and start stitching that again. For this particular tube, what I'd probably do when I get it over to the other table and start turning it, I'd cut off that I already did because, of course, you always have these bias pieces longer than you really need them to be. So this just holds it in place beautifully, and even if it goes a little bit off here where the two raw edges are together, even if that goes off, it won't even matter. It'll still make an absolutely standard tube every time, and there's nothing that you can do wrong with it. So just let it go through, and as soon as it does, then we're ready to turn that. Now the way I'm going to turn this is, of course, over a tube turner, so let's just go over to the table and get that turned. And what we're going to do today is make two things. This pillow for one, and notice how this is all woven out of tubes. And those tubes are a big assortment of fabrics, and this is also why I wanted tubes instead of bias. I might have, well, for one thing, I have the suede that's on this vest on the back and in parts of the vest I'm wearing. I have some ribbons here besides the tubes. I have some charmeuse left over from the blouse. What I have really here is scraps on this pillow and also on this vest. And here's some velvet ribbon, kind of corduroy ribbon really, but there are so many different fabrics there that tubes work out very well. These tubes that we're going to use to turn the fabric tubes come in graduated sizes. I have this whole row of brass ones here. From the very smallest, this makes wonderful little button loops. The ones I made on the vest I'm wearing was made from this second size and just pulled through beautifully. And I'm going to use for this tube I just stitched, about this size ought to do the job. And so I'll just put it through here. And at the other end, I'm going to get it all attached. I'm going to use this little squiggle that comes with them. And what it is kind of like a corkscrew on the end. And you just get it going through the fabric. And if this is very closely woven, you won't have a problem. If it's very loosely woven as this is, it could come loose, so I'll try to safeguard against that by putting it through a couple of times. And then it's just a matter of pulling it through. Now, if this is fabric that presses easily, what you want to do when you start is open the seam allowance here, and as you pull it over the edge of the tube, it just presses it open for you nicely. It's like finger pressing it. But this one doesn't matter at all, so I'm just going to pull it through, which it does in a breeze. I did dozens and dozens of these tubes very quickly, mass producing them all as I made this vest and the pillow. Perhaps you noticed that some of the same fabrics were used in both projects, and so I just made a whole lot of tubes. I was going to use the extras for something or other. And then after you have them all turned, you're going to have to press them. But first, let's look over here. I could have, in these bigger tubes, these aren't the brass, these are plastic tubes, but again, just as slippery, but they're bigger sizes. I could even have turned upholstery fabric, which is what I have here. If this looks a little familiar, if you've been a constant watcher of my show, back several series, I can't remember how many ago, I made window seats for my living room, and this is the fabric from those window seats, and it just matches the pillow I'm making very nicely because it goes in the same room. Eventually, through these shows, I might get my whole house redecorated. Anyway, even upholstery fabric will pull through with these, so it's pretty terrific to have. Think about corduroy, suede, any of those things would turn, and once you have it turned, it's ready to weave. Well, anyway, what we'd have to do next is press it flat, and think how you want to press this. If you press, for instance, maybe you can see better on these lighter fabrics, if you would press this just down flat with the seam here on the back, that would mean that it has to be the back side of the garment against your body rather than the outside. If you turn it over to press it on the edge like this, the seam on the edge, then it really won't matter which is right and which is wrong side, and it'll be the same both. And in fact, if you don't want to back it with anything, you could have it reversible if you do it that way. Well, I've pressed all these tubes that I have here so that the seam is out on the edge, and then I'm going to do a little weaving. Now, a couple things you could use. I have a board here I purchased. It's a padded board so you can press right on it, which is important because I am going to fuse a backing on this. So you can either use something like that or just take a piece of checked or plaid fabric, because what you want is a series of lines. And here we've got lines just as easily, so either way. Then what I'm going to do with all those tubes is simply pin them on this board. I'm first of all going to show you kind of an unusual maybe way to weave this pillow. And the way I did that was, first of all, as quickly as possible. For one thing, I just needed to pick out all the bigger tubes, the longer ones, because this pillow is a definite size. It's 14 inches. I wanted at least 15 inches for the tubes so that I'd have seam allowances. Whereas this vest done on the diagonal, I could use up every little tube left over I had for that, because up in the corners it could use the short tubes, so it really didn't matter a bit. No waste will I have on any of this. Well, anyway, I just want to have a variety of tubes, and I'm going to put them all down. And this is going to be the back side of my vest, so if there is, once in a while I have a tube pressed with a seam in the wrong place. So if it does make a difference, I want to make sure that bad side is up so that it can be seen. And after I have a lot of tubes done, enough that it will be this wide, and of course just measure it or see the markings on the fabric, and see how wide it needs to be. I'm not going to do the whole 15 inches. I'm just going to stop about here. And then what I did is I had them all about even on one end or the other, is put pins in here. Just stick them in the board and put them kind of flat because you're going to press over this. And so you can't have the heads of those pins sticking up straight. You want them instead flat. And every one of them up here close to me, I'm going to pin in like this. Those at the other end, I won't be doing every one. I'm just going to do every other one. And the reason for this is because it's a quicker way of weaving this. Down at the bottom, if I just do every other, that means I'll put this down, and I'll put this one down, and this one, and I'm leaving the in-between ones loose. And after I get all this done, then the in-between ones I'll just flip up out of the way, and I can take a whole lot of other tubes and lay them across here. And it saves a lot of weaving. And I'm going to leave little spaces in between each one. How much space depends on maybe the width of things. You can adjust it later, it won't matter. So maybe it depends on how wide it's going to be. But anyway, just lay a bunch of tubes this way. If you figure you're going to, for instance, need 20 tubes to go across here, then you'll probably want to lay about 8 of them down here so that you have about half of them down. And then go ahead after they're just laid on top and cover them again with these tubes, and this time the vertical tubes I'll pin down as I flip them back over here. And once I have them all flipped down, and you realize I'd have a bigger width than this, I'm just doing a quickie sample here. But as I have them all down, you can see how these are already woven, those that I have in so far. And then take something, whatever it might be. This time I'm going to take a clamp. I used a bodkin when I wove these, so whatever you have. This little clamp is really like a pair of tweezers, but it clamps in place and it holds on to the end of those tubes. If you have any of these, they come in various widths, and it's really to pull elastic through a waistband. But if you have these, and if your tubes are small enough to fit, and there's the catch, they may not be small enough, you could use one of these to connect at the end, so it helps you weave it through. I'm going to use this instead though, and I'll just take a tube here, and I'll have to weave this in between a couple of the other tubes. So this is a simple weaving. It's over one, under another one. So the fact that this one is over the brown tube, this one is going to have to go under. So it's just doing it the reverse way. But half those tubes are already woven by just putting it down that way. So that makes it very easy. And once I have it pulled through, and it's not a bad idea to pull those tubes fairly tight, top and bottom, so that they won't move around. And then you can see after I have some of these woven through, then it would be sliding them all down to get them all real close together so that you won't have any spaces between them. And it makes it so solid that you really could, if you wanted to have this in a garment, use it as a reversible when they're all really close together and quite solid. Now, another reason I wanted to do these with tubes instead of bias is because I saw a pillow like this in a lovely decorating shop. And if you think, well, you can get those at any of the discount shops, and probably for about $15, add a 0 to it. This pillow that I have over here that I made from one similar that I saw, $150 is what the price tag was on it. And I thought, well, the one that they had for $150 didn't match my furnishings. And also, I wasn't going to pay that price. So don't you just love to sew? Don't you love the fact that you can do whatever you want to in your own sewing room, and you don't have to pay those big prices? So just pull it tight every time, get everything all straightened out, and you can see how very quickly you could have this pillow woven. So this is one way, doing it like this, doing it the quick way of weaving, just laying them there and then weaving the in-between ones later. Now after I have this one all woven, because this is a pillow, because it might get some hard wear in that it won't be worn once in a while, it'll be on a couch every day of the year. And so because of that, I decided to back it. And so what the backing is just a piece of any brand, any type, whatever you want, but this is just a real lightweight fusible interfacing. So it's a matter of putting it on the back, and remember I said if any of these tubes have a bad side, I want to see it. I want that side up because the right side's going to be underneath. Now sometimes I would put this down on the board first and weave over it and then press it. But because these are pretty heavy fabrics, I don't think the heat would go through all that easily. That's why it's a good idea to put it over it when you're finished, press that, and then you just handle it like you would any piece of fabric. You'd go around the edge and give it a haircut so that you get rid of all the excess tubes there. Take it to the machine and do a little stay stitching around there so that nothing can move, and you've got your pillow top, and then you just put the back on it. Now the back of this pillow is the same as the back of my vest. And what I have done there, rather than weave the whole thing, I had to back that, of course, with something to make it heavier, to bring it up to the weight of these pieces in front. So I have it all mounted on a piece of flannel. And then I did a little decorative stitching. There are butterflies on the back of this vest. And those butterflies were done by just using one of the memory cards and doing a quick little butterfly, which is about 2 minutes worth, I think, as you push the button, and it does the embroidery. And what I used for this, by the way, is a heavier thread. Instead of the usual 40 weight that you use to embroider things, I used a 30 weight because it shows up a little bit better on those butterflies and makes them a little more outstanding. Well, what I did on the vest is kind of similar to this in that it's just simple weaving and it's using the same tubes basically. But what I did is, for one thing, put it a different direction. I wanted all these to be on the bias, and also I didn't want to weave this twice. So I wove all this in one piece. And after I had it woven and after I had it all backed with the fusible, that's when I cut it apart into 2 pieces, just by deciding after I had it all done, you know, making a little pattern for it and getting it all done. Well, anyway, here's how it was done this way. I could just take it apart, but if this will stay together, I'll leave it here. But this is how I did it. There is on this particular one, and if you don't have one of these commercial ones, you can do it on your plaid or check. Simply draw a line that's on a diagonal if you want to weave something on the bias. And with that diagonal line intact, then it's going to be a very simple process to get all of these at nice right angles to each other so that everything is actually on the bias, on the diagonal, on the 45 degree. And what I also did with this, because I was working with little tiny pieces in the corners, because see, as it comes up here to the corners, I don't have those long tubes, and or the long, fabric tubes, and I really don't need them at the corners. Here's where I could use those little short ones just to fill in the space. And here's where I'd also weave some ribbons in with it, as I've done with this, and they might be velvet or taffeta or whatever ribbons. It just made kind of a pretty look to so there isn't so much sameness, so that it all looks a little different, varying the colors, the fabrics, the widths, making it all a little bit different. Now, if I would do this, I wouldn't want to weave this through so it's all this wide and leave it that way, because I'm wasting all this ribbon. What I would do instead, after I weave it through, is cut off where I'm at the end of it. For instance, I would just weave this little bit up and down, and this also would be easier if I had the ends pinned down. I'll hold them here. And instead of wasting all this extra top and bottom, what I would do is just, when I pull it all the way through as far as it needs to be, which would be to here, and then I would cut it off wherever it's supposed to be on this side so that nothing goes to waste. So you simply cut it off, and then I can use this again to weave between some other ones. So nothing goes to waste at all when you do some of this weaving. This is also a nice way to coordinate your wardrobe by bringing in some things that you wouldn't have considered wearing together, but by the time you add the extra colors, it gives you a little permission slip to, yes, wear these things together, whatever they are, and make a coordinated outfit out of it. Now, not only can I do these difficult fabrics, I don't have any with me today, but I have done some with suede, with other things. Think about making a belt. Now, what I have here for a belt is just this very slippery silk fabric, the silk charmeuse that I have here. But it also is nice to make a suede belt that way, and suede will also pull just beautifully through these tubes. So here again, it would be a matter of deciding, do you want a wide belt, in which case use a bigger tube, maybe all the way up to this size tube, which is quite large, or do you want a narrow belt? And fashion comes and goes, so do it however you like or however it's most flattering on you. But I could just as easily with that suede go down here to one of the smaller ones. And if I would do that, I very well may pull a tube through it of something like upholstery welting or something else to pad out that tube to make it a little bit heavier and make the belt work that way. Now when we have button loops like this, usually what you do is make the tube. This is a little narrow tube, of course, but you make the tube and pull it through the tube turner, and usually we would cut them apart, and you would have, as you sew them on the front of your garment, you'd usually have the raw edges out here at the edge, and then the tube would go around here. The button loop would go around this way, and you'd put the facing on top, sew it all, and then when you turn the facing back, the tubes flip out, or the loops flip out. Well, I did something a little different here. I left it all in just one short loop here instead of making each one separate. Left it all in one piece, just decided how much I would need for each button it was going to go through. And usually when you have button loops, you want to have ball buttons or something with a little bit of depth to them because they work well with loops. But with this one, I just did a little bar tack every place where I needed it for the size of the button, so that also works out well. Let's go back and do a little bit more weaving. Now, of course, this is a lot easier if you have those pins in, so I'm just going to go ahead and put some pins in. And notice what I'm trying to do is build a rectangle. Kind of this shape is what I have on my vest. And so I can come way out to this corner and way up to this corner, except I don't have long enough tubes unless I pull them up there, which I shall do, in order to make them long enough. So I'll just put a few pins in here and get a few in the other end so that nothing can move. And I've always thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a loom? But if you don't have room for it, and if you don't have those big looms, some of them quite large, everybody can do this. This is a short one. I'm just going to pull it out because it wasn't going to be long enough. Where it was, in that position, it wasn't going to work. And then on the other end, we'll also put some pins in it and get this all nicely secured. But this is something everybody can do, and this is a great way to use those scraps that you have accumulated from whatever the project might have been that you did a while back, and now you notice as you go through your closet, well, golly, if I would just take some of those scraps I already have and put some others with it, I could really rejuvenate the wardrobe a little bit by putting some different things together by just adding some different colors. Okay, now we have it kind of built into a little bit more of a rectangle, so this will work better. Now, I really liked using those ribbons. Oh, about last series or 2 series ago, I had an awful lot of ribbons on some show, and I still had a lot of those left, so I kind of thought as I was making these projects, let's just use some of them, the blue and the pillow and the pink ones in this. And even if I would sit on that couch, you probably wouldn't even notice the fact that I've used the same taupe and browns in both projects, because the more colorful fabrics kind of overpower it, and it doesn't really turn out to be too noticeable that way. Well, okay, once we have these pins in, then it would be taking maybe some of these shorter tubes. Long enough? No, not quite. Here's one that is, and so I'll take this one and weave it again. And still, just very simple. Now, this is even a nice project for a child. Maybe this would be something that would get them excited about sewing and get them going, help them sew the tubes and show them how to turn it, and they could do this very, very nicely. And I think most of the little girls and some of the little boys I know would rather like doing this. And we'll just get these woven here, and I didn't pin the other end, so you can see it was more difficult without the other end pinned. Well, just kind of weave out. I did the main part first probably, and then wove out to the corners later, I would guess is what I did as I did this vest. Now, since I did this vest, which might have been about 2 weeks ago, I've done a few other projects, and so it's hard to remember exactly how I did it. But the point of it is, it doesn't even matter. You can do it different every time. You invent new things for yourself along the way, and they all turn out working equally well. And very often you find that, oh, that's a better way. I should have done it that way in the first place. Well, anyway, we can keep on weaving. And bodkins are also nice little things. These tweezers are very similar in that they do catch the fabric and hold on to it so that we can get the weaving done. and just keep doing that until you fill up the space completely. And then with this also, after it's all filled up, then I would just put another fusible on top of this, get it all pressed down so it's in one piece, and then decide what you want to do. What I did with this is cut out paper patterns. I had the whole vest pattern, and I just cut out these sections, fit them on this in the best way possible so I wouldn't waste any of it, and just really cut it in two. What you now see coming down here, this pocket, what I cut off here is what you see coming up here. So what that means is turn this panel upside down, put it right here, and this is where I had my big rectangle originally. So very easy to do that way once you kind of plan it out in advance and get all your fabrics together and see exactly what's going to work. And it's that combination of fabrics. It's not only fun to use up the scraps, but it's just fun to put them together. You feel like a designer when you do this, and that feeling I really like. I like to have something completely original that you don't see anywhere else by putting the things together that are particularly you, and therefore go with what you like and what you have in your wardrobe. Well, it seems that we still have a bunch of these gauzy tubes left over that I didn't use for this at all. And so what I'm going to do, and these tubes, I said, you know, were a little difficult to make, but they're all made, they turn like a breeze once you have them stitched. And they are going to go into a project next week. So come join me then. They should be especially useful if we can just pin down what it is we want to do with it. Well, you enjoyed doing this, did you? Creating new fabric. Let's try yet another way we can do some weaving as we come back next time and do a little pin weaving.